I have signed my name on over 6,000 death certificates. 6,000 times I looked at a body, checked for a pulse, listened for a heartbeat, and wrote the words, "Time of death." 6,000 people. I remember almost none of them, but 3 of them. I will remember until the day someone signs MY death certificate, because those 3 people were not dead. I signed the paper. I pulled the sheet over their face. I told the family. And then they opened their eyes. My name is Maria. I am 102 years old, and for 74 years I worked as a medical examiner and attending physician in hospitals across this country. My job was not to save lives. Other doctors did that. My job started when they failed. I was the one they called when the monitors went flat, when the crash cart didn't work, when the surgeon stepped back and shook his head. I was the last doctor to touch you. I would walk in. I would examine the body. I would check for every sign of life that modern medicine recognizes. And when I found nothing, I would look at the clock, write the time on a piece of paper, and tell the nurse, "This patient is deceased." I did it 6,000 times. I thought I understood death better than any person alive. I was wrong, because death is not as simple as a stopped heart. And I learned that the hard way, 3 times. Before I tell you about those 3 cases, you need to understand something about what it means to pronounce someone dead. People think it's easy. They think you check for a pulse and that's it. It's not. When I pronounce someone dead, I follow a protocol that has been the same for over a century. I check for a pulse at the wrist, then at the neck, then at the femoral artery in the leg. I listen with a stethoscope for heart sounds for a full 60 seconds, not 10, not 30, 60. I check for respiratory movement. I listen for breath sounds. I hold a mirror under the nose. I check the pupils. I shine a light into each eye. Dead pupils don't react. They stay fixed and dilated, wide open, like 2 black holes staring at nothing. I check for reflexes. I press on the nail beds. I touch the cornea. A living person will flinch. A dead person will not. I do all of this. Every single time. For every single time. For every single patient. I am thorough. I am careful. I have never rushed. In 74 years, I have never made an error, except 3 times. 3 times I did everything right, every check, every protocol, every test. And the body was cold, the heart was silent, the eyes were fixed, and I signed the paper. And I was wrong. Let me tell you about the first time. It was February 1967. I was 43 years old and working at a county hospital in upstate New York. It was the middle of winter, one of the worst cold snaps in a decade. The temperature outside was 9 degrees below zero. At 2:15 in the morning, an ambulance brought in a man. His name was Joseph. He was 31 years old, a construction worker, big man, over 6 feet tall, strong as a horse. They found him in a ditch on the side of Route 11, about 4 miles outside of town. His car had gone off the road and into a ditch filled with 2 feet of icy water. The police estimated he had been lying in that water for over 3 hours before someone spotted his headlights in the ditch and called it in. When the paramedics pulled him out, his body temperature was 72 degrees. Normal body temperature is 98.6. His was 72. His skin was grey, not pale, not white, grey, the colour of wet concrete. His lips were dark blue. His fingers were dark blue. His eyes were half open and completely fixed. There was no pulse, no heartbeat, no breath. The paramedics performed CPR for 20 minutes in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Nothing. The emergency room doctor worked on him for another 40 minutes. Warming blankets, heated IV fluids, chest compressions, epinephrine, atropine, everything. Nothing. At 3:22 a.m., the ER doctor called me. He said, "Maria, I need you to come pronounce. We have a hypothermia case. Young male. No vitals for over an hour. We've done everything." I walked into that room and I saw Joseph lying on the table. I will tell you something. After 20 years of seeing dead bodies, you develop an instinct. You can walk into a room and know, before you even touch the patient, you just know. And when I looked at Joseph, I knew this man was dead. His body was cold, not cool, cold, like touching a piece of furniture. His skin had no elasticity. When I pressed his arm, the indentation stayed, like pressing clay. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. Wrist. Nothing. Wrist. Nothing. Neck. Nothing. Femoral. Nothing. I placed my stethoscope on his chest and listened for 60 seconds. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. I shined a light in his eyes. Both pupils were fixed and dilated. 7 millimeters each, wide open, black, empty. No corneal reflex, no gag reflex, no response to deep pain stimulation. I looked at the ER doctor. He looked at me. I said, "Time of death." 3:41 a.m. I signed the certificate. I filled out the paperwork. The nurse pulled the sheet up over Joseph's face, and I went to the break room to get coffee. Because it was the middle of the night and I had been woken up from sleep for this. I sat down. I poured my coffee. I took one sip, and then I heard a sound that I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. A scream, not a patient scream, a nurse scream, a scream of pure terror. I dropped my coffee. I ran back to the room, and when I got there, the nurse was pressed against the far wall, both hands over her mouth, shaking so badly she could barely stand. I looked at the table. The sheet had moved. Not fallen off, not slid due to gravity, moved. From underneath, something had pushed it. And then I saw his hand. Joseph's hand was hanging off the side of the table. That hand had been lying flat at his side when I left the room. I know it was. I had placed it there myself. Now it was hanging off the edge. The fingers were slightly curled, and as I stood there, frozen in the doorway, one finger twitched. I am a woman of science. I have no patience for ghost stories or superstition, but I will tell you that in that moment, standing in that room at 3:50 in the morning, looking at the hand of a man I had just pronounced dead 9 minutes ago, I felt something I had never felt before in my medical career. I felt afraid. I rushed to the table. I pulled back the sheet. Joseph's eyes were still half open, still fixed, still dilated, but his chest moved, a tiny, almost invisible rise, and then, 3 seconds later, a fall. He was breathing. A dead man was breathing. I shouted for the ER team. They came running. We started warming him aggressively. Hot 4 fluids directly into his veins. Warm blankets, heated oxygen, everything we had. And over the next 4 hours, something happened that I cannot fully explain even after decades of studying it. His heart started beating. First, just a quiver, a disorganized electrical flutter on the monitor that meant nothing. Then a rhythm, slow, irregular, but real. His body temperature climbed, 74 degrees, then 78, then 83, then 89, and at 7:45 that morning, Joseph opened his eyes. He looked at me. He looked at the nurse. He looked at the ceiling. And he said, "Where am I?" A dead man asked me where he was. I had signed his death certificate 4 hours earlier. It was still sitting on the counter with my signature on it. I had to tear it up. Joseph survived. He walked out of that hospital 9 days later with all 10 fingers, all 10 toes, and a fully functioning brain. The medical explanation is something called the mammalian diving reflex, combined with severe hypothermia. When the human body gets cold enough, it shuts down. The heart slows to a rate so low that even a stethoscope can't detect it. The blood retreats to the core, protecting the brain and vital organs. The metabolism drops to almost nothing. The body enters a state so close to death that it is, for all practical purposes, indistinguishable from death. There is an old saying in emergency medicine, "You're not dead until you're warm and dead." I knew that saying. Every doctor knows that saying. But on that night, at 3:41 a.m., standing over a body that was 72 degrees and showed absolutely zero signs of life, I forgot it. I signed the paper, and I was almost responsible for sending a living man to the morgue. That was the first time. I didn't sleep for 3 days after Joseph. I replayed the protocol in my head 1,000 times. Did I rush? Did I skip something? Did I miss a sign? No, I didn't. I did everything by the book. And that was the part that terrified me. Because if I could do everything perfectly and still be wrong, then what was the protocol actually worth? I started adding extra steps. I started waiting longer. I started checking twice, 3 times, 4 times before signing. My colleagues thought I was being paranoid. I didn't care, because I had looked into the face of death and death had looked back and blinked. Now let me tell you about the second time. This one still makes my hands cold when I think about it. It was October 1984. I was 60 years old. I'd been pronouncing patients dead for over 3 decades. After the Joseph incident, I'd become known as the most careful, most thorough medical examiner in the hospital. I took longer than anyone else. I checked everything twice. I waited. I watched. I was never going to make that mistake again. And for 17 years I didn't. Until Angela. Angela was 28 years old, a young mother, 2 children, a daughter who was 4 and a son who was 18 months. She came to the hospital for a routine procedure, a minor surgery, removal of a benign growth on her thyroid gland. Simple, safe, the kind of surgery where the biggest risk is the anesthesia, not the procedure. Angela went into surgery at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. By 8:40, she was dead. An allergic reaction to the anesthetic, severe anaphylaxis. Her throat closed. Her blood pressure dropped to nothing. Her heart went into an arrhythmia that the crash team could not convert. They tried for 35 minutes. At 9:15 a.m., the surgeon called me. I walked into that operating room and I saw a young woman lying on the table. Her face was swollen from the allergic reaction. Her skin was mottled, purple and white patches across her chest and arms. I performed my protocol, every step, every check. No pulse, no heartbeat, no respiration, fist-dilated pupils, no reflexes. I checked twice. I waited 5 minutes and checked again. Nothing. The body temperature was normal, 98.2 degrees. This was not a hypothermia case. There was no hidden variable, no diving reflex to account for. This woman was dead by every measure I knew. Time of death. 9:32 a.m. I signed the paper. The surgical team left the room. The nurses began preparing the body for the family to view before transport to the morgue. I went to my office, and then I did something I have never told another living soul. I sat at my desk, and I thought about Joseph. I thought about that hand hanging off the table, that finger twitching, and I felt a pull, a physical pull, in my chest, like something was telling me to go back to that room. I am a scientist. I don't believe in intuition. I don't believe in premonitions. But I went back. I walked back into that room 17 minutes after I had signed the death certificate. The nurse was there alone, preparing Angela's body. She had removed the surgical equipment. She had cleaned the skin. She was about to place the identification tag on the toe. I said, "I need to examine her again." The nurse looked at me like I had lost my mind. I didn't care. I walked to the table. I placed my stethoscope on Angela's chest, and I heard nothing. Silence. I listened for 30 seconds, 45, 60, nothing. I was about to remove the stethoscope. I was about to apologize to the nurse for the strange interruption. And then at the 63-second mark, I heard it. One beat, not a normal heartbeat, not a strong thump. It was a whisper, a ghost of a contraction, so faint that if I'd been breathing heavily, if the room had been anything less than completely silent, if I had stopped listening at 60 seconds like protocol required, I would have missed it. I froze. I waited. 8 seconds later, another one. A tiny squeeze, barely audible. The nurse saw my face and she went white. I shouted for a crash team. They came running, and over the next 90 minutes they brought Angela back. The anaphylaxis had pushed her heart into a rhythm so slow, so faint, that it was functionally undetectable by standard examination. Her body was producing just enough cardiac output to keep her brain cells alive, but not enough to register on any of the checks I had performed. She was in a state that medical literature describes as profound cardiovascular collapse with minimal residual cardiac activity, a state so close to death that the difference is measured in microvolts of electrical activity. Angela survived. She walked out of that hospital 11 days later. She went home to her 2 children because I went back into that room, because something told me to go back. Now here is the part that haunts me. What if I hadn't gone back? I would have gone on with my day. The nurse would have tagged the body. Angela would have been transported to the morgue. She would have been placed in a cold storage drawer, and at some point in that cold drawer, her heart would have either recovered on its own, and she would have woken up in the dark, in a steel box, in the basement of a hospital. Or the cold would have finished what the anaphylaxis started, and she would have truly died. Alone. I don't know which possibility is worse. I went home that night and I couldn't look at my own hands. These hands had signed a death certificate for a living woman, a mother, a 28-year-old mother, and the only reason she is alive is because of a feeling I can't explain that pulled me back into a room I had no medical reason to re-enter. I have spent my entire career trusting science, trusting protocol, trusting evidence, but Angela is alive because of something that has no name in any medical textbook I have ever read. That was the 2nd time. Now, the 3rd. This is the one that changed everything. This is the one that made me question not just my protocol, not just my competence, but the very definition of what it means to be dead. It was March 2001. I was 77 years old. I was supposed to have retired years ago, but every time I tried, they pulled me back. I was the most experienced examiner in the system, the one they called for the difficult cases, the one nobody questioned. Except now I question myself, every single time. After Joseph, after Angela, every death certificate I signed felt like a gamble. I would check and recheck and recheck again. I would wait 10 minutes, 20, 30. Some of the younger doctors thought I was losing my edge, going senile, taking too long. I wasn't losing my edge. I was afraid that one more body was going to open its eyes after I signed the paper. On March 14th, 2001, at approximately 11 p.m., a 16-year-old boy was brought into the emergency room. His name was Thomas. He had been found at the bottom of a swimming pool at a house party. Someone had seen him jump in. No one had seen him go under. By the time they pulled him out, he had been submerged for an estimated 12 to 15 minutes. Paramedics worked on him for 22 minutes at the scene. No response. The ER team worked on him for over an hour at the hospital. Aggressive resuscitation. He heated fluids, continuous CPR, mechanical ventilation, every drug in the crash cart, nothing. At 12:18 a.m. they called me. When I walked into that room, I saw a boy, not a man, not an elderly patient at the end of a long life. A boy, 16 years old, still had acne on his forehead, still had a friendship bracelet on his wrist. His sneakers were still on the floor next to the bed where the paramedics had pulled them off. His mother was in the hallway. I could hear her. That sound. The sound a mother makes when she knows but doesn't want to know. A low, continuous moan that isn't crying. It's something worse than crying. It's the sound of a soul tearing. I examined Thomas. No pulse, no heartbeat, no respiration, fixed, dilated pupils, no reflexes, no response to any stimulation. His body was cold, not hypothermic cold, not Joseph cold, but cool, 94 degrees. He had been pulled from a heated swimming pool, but the prolonged resuscitation in an air-conditioned ER had lowered his temperature, 94 degrees. Cool, but not cold. This is important. Remember this number. I checked everything. I checked it twice. I checked it 3 times. I waited 10 minutes and checked again. Nothing. Absolute, profound, unwavering nothing. Every fiber of my training, every protocol, every medical standard told me the same thing. This boy was dead. But I didn't sign. I stood in that room with my pen in my hand and the certificate on the clipboard, and I did not sign. The ER doctor looked at me. "Maria," he said, "it's been over 90 minutes. There's nothing more we can do." "I know," I said, But I didn't sign. I don't know why. I had no medical reason. There was no evidence of life, no ghost of a heartbeat, no twitch, no twitch, no breath. But Joseph was in my head. Angela was in my head. 63 seconds of listening, a hand falling off a table. I said, "Give me 1 hour." The ER doctor stared at me. 1 hour? Maria, with all due respect. 1 hour, I said again. Keep him on the warming protocol. Keep the monitors connected. Give me 1 hour. He agreed. I think he only agreed because of my reputation, because I was Maria, because in 54 years I had earned the right to ask for 1 more hour. So we waited, and nothing happened. 10 minutes, nothing. 20 minutes, nothing. 20 minutes, nothing. 30 minutes. The ER doctor looked at me from across the room with an expression that said, "Maria, it's time." I raised one finger. Wait, 40 minutes. Nothing, 45 minutes. Nothing. I felt my certainty crumbling. I was wrong. There was nothing here. This boy was gone. And I was just an old woman, haunted by the past, unable to let go. I picked up my pen. I placed the tip on the certificate, and the monitor beeped. 1 beep. A single spike on a flat line that had been silent for over 2 hours. Everyone in the room froze. I looked at the monitor. Flat, silent, nothing. 5 seconds, nothing. 10 seconds, nothing. And then another beep, and then another, and then a rhythm, weak, erratic, unstable, but there, present, alive, but there, present, alive. Thomas's heart was beating. The room erupted. The crash team moved in. They stabilized the rhythm. They supported the blood pressure. They ventilated. And over the next 7 hours, Thomas came back. He opened his eyes at 8:15 the next morning. The first thing he saw was his mother's face. She was holding his hand. She was crying so hard she couldn't speak. He looked at her and said, "Mom, why are you crying?" Thomas survived. He had some memory loss, some difficulty with coordination for a few months, but he recovered. He graduated high school. He went to college. He got married. He is alive right now, somewhere in this country. A 40-year-old man with a life, a family, a future, because an old woman asked for 1 more hour. 60 minutes. That's all that separated Thomas from a body bag. If I had signed that paper at 12:18 a.m. like protocol told me to, his mother would have buried her son, and no one would have ever known that his heart was just waiting. Waiting for 60 more minutes to remember how to beat. After Thomas, I changed the way I worked forever. I added a mandatory waiting period to every pronouncement I performed. I fought with hospital administrators. I fought with insurance companies. I fought with doctors who told me I was wasting resources on dead patients. I didn't care, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that death is not a moment. It is not a switch that flips from on to off. Death is a process, a slow, gradual transition, and somewhere in that transition there is a grey zone, a space between alive and dead where the body has not yet made its final decision. And in that grey zone miracles hide, not religious miracles, not supernatural events, medical miracles, biological miracles, the miracle of a human heart that refuses to stop. I pronounced 6,000 people dead in my career. 3 of them came back, 3 out of 6,000. That is a tiny number, a fraction of a fraction. But those 3 people are alive. They had children, they had careers, they had decades of life that almost didn't happen. Because of a finger twitch, a gut feeling, and an old woman who asked for 1 more hour. I retired in 2004. I was 80 years old. On my last day, I sat alone in my office, and I looked at my hands, these hands that had touched 6,000 bodies, these hands that had closed 6,000 eyes, these hands that had almost made the worst mistake a doctor can make 3 times. I thought about Joseph lying in that ditch in water that was 9 degrees below zero, his body shutting down to save itself, playing dead so convincingly that he fooled every test I had. I thought about Angela, her heart beating once every 8 seconds, whispering so quietly that 60 seconds of listening wasn't enough, that I needed 63. I thought about Thomas, his heart waiting in silence for 2 hours before deciding that 16 years wasn't enough, that it wasn't ready, that it wanted more time. And I understood something. The human body does not want to die. It will fight. It will hide. It will go silent and wait. It will shut itself down to the barest flicker of existence and hold on, hold on, hold on until someone notices. And that is why I could never rush. That is why I checked and rechecked. That is why I asked for 1 more hour. Because you cannot always trust silence. Sometimes silence is not death. Sometimes silence is the body's way of saying, I'm still here. Please don't give up on me. My name is Maria. I am 102 years old. I have signed my name on 6,000 death certificates, but the 3 signatures I never made, those are the ones that kept me human. If my career taught me anything, it is this: do not be so certain about endings, not in medicine, not in life, not in anything, because sometimes the heart has a plan the mind cannot see, and sometimes all it needs is 1 more hour. Thank you for listening to an old woman who spent her life with the dead and learned the most important lessons from the ones who came back. Hold on to the people you love. And if you ever feel like giving up on someone or something, or yourself, remember Thomas. Remember that flat line. Remember that single beep after 2 hours of silence, and give it 1 more hour. You never know what's waiting on the other side of that silence.